thought at first it was a motorcycle backfire from one of the many motorcycles alongside of us in the motorcade. Bob Pierpoint jumped out of his seat and said, "That's gunfire."
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
The further release of declassified assassination files in 2022 shed further light on the events surrounding the assassination of Kennedy in 1963.
More documents have been released about the presidency first, the context of what happened, then about the assassination itself.
The fact that we could not interrogate him and find out his motive and exactly why he did this has created all the room for conspiracies of all kinds, and there's a new one every day.
We've got different perspectives, but I don't think we've necessarily had anything that's fundamentally challenged our view of what happened on the day.
What's crystal clear, despite the fact that over 4,000 files are still being held classified, the overwhelming fact is that both the CIA and the FBI were fully aware of Oswald's movement prior to 22nd of November.
People have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
You shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
You should think the shot came from up on top of the viaduct toward the president, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Not on the viaduct itself, but up on top of the hill, a little mound of ground near the garden.
So you can see why non-crazy people would wonder about what really happened. And of course, many have wondered. The House of Representatives impaneled a special committee to reinvestigate the JFK assassination. Their bipartisan conclusion? Jack Kennedy was almost certainly murdered as the result of a conspiracy.
It is our conclusion, with a probability of 95% or better, there was indeed a shot fired from the grassy knoll.
In fact, one of the declassified documents is a release that transcribes a message given by J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI just 2 days after the assassination. What it states is that the FBI were intercepting Oswald's mail prior to the 22nd of November. Further, the FBI knew that Oswald had contacted both the Cuban and the Russian embassies in the weeks leading up to the event.
Congress found that, yeah, it was a plot. It was a conspiracy. There were multiple people involved.
Could this have simply been CIA incompetence? Or does it hint at something more sinister, some sort of coordinated activity between some complex mix of the intelligence agencies and the mob?
Where did all this begin? You know, as you said, we know a lot about the 20th century Kennedys and their success and what they mean to us as a country and what they represent. Where did it all begin?
The only way we can truly understand what unfolded on that November day in Dallas is to go back 16 years to the inception of the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was formed in 1947, directly after Truman's signing of the National Security Act.
But Truman was painfully aware of the ways fragmentation, disorganization, and inter-service rivalries had contributed to Pearl Harbor, and he wanted to create a new post-war military and national intelligence structure,
which had a backdrop of increasing concerns about Soviet Union activity post-World War II.
You begin to get, by the late 1940s, is this clash of systems and this sense that both sides are trying to build alliances.
Self-protection is a primary function of any organism. This is the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government. We watch for the electronic imprint of the enemy's bombers. We listen for the whine of his missiles. The very air is full of information for the spies of today.
I think to put this simply, to boil it down, the CIA was born out of fear. People on Capitol Hill, people in the White House, people across the country broadly did not want the United States caught napping again. They did not want another strategic surprise along the lines of Pearl Harbor.
But also this sense that the US needs to be on its toes with regards to the Soviet Union, international communism. The US now has many more military bases. Its presence is global, unlike any other time in its history.
Just as the new Central Intelligence Agency was asserting itself, a fresh-faced young war hero was taking his first steps into the political arena. Aged just 29, John Fitzgerald Kennedy took his seat in the United States Congress as the representative from Massachusetts' 11th Congressional District. Just 5 years later, he had graduated to the upper house as the junior senator for Massachusetts and was already being groomed as the Democratic Party's candidate for the top job.
He's well thought of as a senator and then builds that profile up.
But during his time there, he actually wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage,
which we now know was ghostwritten by the guy who became one of Kennedy's speechwriters, Theodore Sorensen. There's a big thing that gets national attention, lots of television coverage, a national audience. So he's gradually building what is sort of local support into a national TV audience.
JFK was making quite a name for himself. Aside from publishing his Pulitzer Prize award-winning book, he was actively promoting the economy of Massachusetts and fighting against the movement of jobs to the south.
Such standards would be of tremendous importance to us in not only helping the average man and woman who is thrown out of work, but in also maintaining purchasing power in this country.
The Kennedys had the arrival of their first child, Caroline. The celebrity status of the Kennedy family was well into the ascendancy.
Plays to sort of an American ideal of the family, particularly in the Cold War era, the family, the home, as the important part of American society.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help you God. So help me God.
CIA was an instrument of the presidency really during this time. It was working for the president, but unchecked in other ways. No one was really overseeing or holding the CIA to account. There's two sides to the CIA house. One side looks very much like a university. The mission of that side of the house is to go out into the world and understand what's going on in the world. But then you have the other side of the CIA house, and that's the special operations, covert action side of the house. And this is where agencies like the CIA go out into the world with a view to change the world. Covert action can be defined as an attempt by states to influence, impact, or change the domestic affairs of foreign states.
Allen Dulles started his career in the diplomatic service, then becoming a lawyer and joining the same law firm as his brother John.
Worked in Wall Street as well. He loved business, loved business, and that I think is an important point to acknowledge when we consider and when we look at some of the American covert interventions in the 1950s and how they arguably served to advance the cause of American capitalism.
Through the 1930s, he was legal advisor to the League of Nations and met a number of world leaders, including both Mussolini and Hitler. And in 1952, Eisenhower appointed him as the head of the CIA. The CIA's Executive Action Committee played a significant role in developments in Guatemala. The United Food Company had long been a strong corporate force within the country. They appointed Allen Dulles as their legal counsel.
Guatemala City, 5,000 feet above sea level, has a population about the size of Jacksonville, Florida, or Fort Worth, Texas. For many years, these fascinating tropical countries have been served by United Fruit Company's Great White Fleet.
The United States was using its commercial muscle to infiltrate countries it feared were becoming infected by communism. It is considered by many that the United Fruit Company was, in effect, a front for the CIA. Jacobo Arbenz took power in Guatemala and undertook a major program of reform.
Arbenz in Guatemala, after coming to power, starts to introduce a lot of land reform, starts to appropriate the profits and proceeds of companies like the United Fruit Company, and obviously this is impacting the American bottom line.
In 1954, the CIA under Allen Dulles, supposedly concerned that the communists were supporting Arbenz, organized to overthrow him.
But I think the basic question with regard to Guatemala is whether or not the CIA carried this out on its own initiative, in which case it would be wholly improper.
Allen Dulles was absolutely instrumental in the overthrow of their sitting leader in 1954.
Through the lens of policymakers in Washington, Arbenz appears a little bit too left-leaning for their liking, appears a little bit too socialist, appears even a little bit too communist.
Putting aside his obvious financial interests in the country, the argument from a CIA perspective was the suppression of the development of communism.
I can assure you that the CIA has given these committees full information about what it's doing, how it's spending its money, and how it operates.
Carlos Castillo Armas then became president and took about reversing all of the reforms that had taken place, returning the profitability to the United Fruit Company.
Well, he's gone by 57 because he's a pretty nasty individual. He very much falls into the category of what we would associate as being a dictator.
In 1957, Armas was assassinated by Romeo Vasquez. Vasquez had been in the military but dismissed due to his communist leanings. Rather curiously, he was then rapidly appointed to the Presidential Palace Guard and then assassinated the president with 2 bullets. Shortly after that, Vasquez committed suicide before he was tried and left behind some Soviet-supporting diaries.
The killer was a palace sentry who took his own life. Therefore, no one knows for sure who murdered Castillo Armas.
It was this ruthless removal of a head of state by the CIA, which some will claim later, was a dress rehearsal for aiding and abetting in the slaughter of their own commander-in-chief in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald had a troubled education. At the age of 12, he was put in juvenile detention for truancy.
This boy was first brought into the Domestic Relations Court Children's Division here in New York. He was brought in, as you know, because he'd been truanting from school. He had been absent 47 days from a period from October till January.
He was an oddball. I really think it was a matter of he felt like he was a little smarter, possibly better than the rest of the people.
Because he wasn't very personable. He didn't seem to get along with everybody, talk a lot.
He had a fight with a couple of boys, and that's how I first saw him.
I went to 12 different schools prior to joining the Marines at the age of 17.
It said that this boy had passive-aggressive tendencies, that he had schizoid features, and that he really was a boy who was feeling a deep sense of isolation, a deep sense of rejection, and who really had a supposedly hostility towards father figures.
He was then posted to Japan at the Atsugi Air Base, where they flew U-2 spy planes. He was court-martialed twice, once for accidentally shooting himself, and the second time for getting into a fight with the sergeant that disciplined him. He was briefly imprisoned, but then released, but demoted. He taught himself how to speak Russian whilst on the base, and was qualified as initially a sharpshooter, but then taken down to the level of marksman.
The problem is when you have issues that cross the sort of the domestic international line. So what happens when there is an issue, an individual will fall under the remit of the CIA, but also the FBI. And Lee Harvey Oswald would be one of those.
In 1959, Fidel Castro took power in Cuba and set about transforming his country into the first communist state in the Western world.
So Castro's rise to power in Cuba sets off a whole host of anxieties within the United States. Castro is a self-declared communist.
Later that year, Castro flew to Washington, D.C., where he had a private meeting with Vice President Richard Nixon.
We are not afraid of an idea, because we have our idea, and we believe in our idea.
He wants to meet Castro to see how truly communist Castro was, try to get a feel for how close to the Soviet Union Castro was. Nixon comes away from that meeting thinking, wow, Castro is a problem.
Only answer to communism is a massive offensive for freedom. Freedom from hunger, from disease, and a victory for the ageless hope of people everywhere. Freedom from tyranny.
The relationship between the United States and Cuba deteriorated rapidly.
Nixon wanted to see Castro gone. So the word is put out to the CIA, what can you do to help us here? And the CIA starts to put together certain plans, certain operations with respect to Cuba. Assassination is discussed, but the road they ultimately want to go down is removal of Castro. They want to remove him by way of a covert action. So getting rid of Castro becomes something bordering on an obsession, not just for the policy-making community, but also for the CIA.
But even as Nixon was facing off against Castro, he was gearing up for his own tilt at the United States presidency, where his opponent will be none other than the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy.
Senator John Kennedy of Massachusetts, Democrat, throws his hat in the presidential ring at a Washington press conference.
I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
John F. Kennedy announced his intention to run for presidency in January 1960. Kennedy spoke of a new frontier and promoted the expansion of programs to aid the poor, protect African Americans' right to vote, and improve African Americans' employment and education opportunities. Kennedy told the convention delegates that he would get the nation moving again. He declared that the United States would have both the will and the strength to resist communism around the world.
One of the big problems that John Kennedy faced running for the presidency was that he was Catholic. We don't talk a lot about it now, but in the 1940s and 1950s there was virulent anti-Catholicism in the United States. He and his team knew that they had to address that, so he spends a lot of the campaign having to say, I'm a presidential candidate, I'm the Democratic presidential candidate, not the Catholic candidate for president. His father's money is really important. It takes a lot of money, even in the 1940s and 1950s, to run for political office. His links with the film industry brought him into connection with celebrities, which then sort of feeds into JFK's later career.
But above all, Kennedy needed to present himself as vital and vigorous a Cold War warrior as his Republican rival for the presidency, Richard Nixon.
Nixon absolutely despised JFK. It was really for a social reason. Richard Nixon had been born effectively into poverty. Nixon, therefore, coming out of poverty, coming out of this background, he had a real chip on his shoulder about people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. People who had not had to struggle like Nixon had had to struggle to get to the top. And who was the darling of the silver spoon group? Who was the individual in US political life who personified privilege? It was JFK, so far as Nixon was concerned.
But in the bitter presidential election battle of 1960, it was the boy with the silver spoon who would come out on top.
Has a decision been reached on how far this country would be willing to go in helping an anti-Castro uprising or invasion in Cuba are concerned?
Well, first I want to say that there will not be, under any conditions, be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces.
But when he reached the White House, Kennedy found that the CIA was already hard at work on a plan to sabotage the Castro regime and take back control in Cuba.
is the White House, the home and the office of the President of the United States. Last November, some 70 million American citizens cast secret ballots to determine who would fill this chair, to determine upon whom would fall the responsibilities of this office. The choice was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the youngest man ever elected.
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability,
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
He's facing quite an uphill battle on Inauguration Day. He really has to convince a lot of Americans that he's the right person, that he can do this, that he's got something to bring to the table.
Immediately after his inauguration as President of the United States, John F. Kennedy appointed his brother Robert Kennedy as the Attorney General.
Who had been his campaign manager, so he was sort of visible. Quite a high-profile role for someone who hadn't had a lot of trial experience.
He then made it a priority to clamp down on organised crime.
Robert Kennedy is trying to convince Hoover that the FBI needs to refocus, right? That actually organised crime is one of the biggest threats to the nation.
The biggest haven for organised crime in the 1950s had been Cuba, with the ability to launder their illegal gains through Havana's casinos. Whilst hoping to avoid Bobby Kennedy's crusade against their interests in mainland America, mob bosses were hoping that his brother could wrench back control of Cuba from Castro so they could restart their businesses there. Lee Harvey Oswald was honourably released from the Marine Corps and moved into the Marine Corps Reserve. Much has been made about Oswald's apparent obsession with communism and Marxism, but there's some debate about that. There are various instances where he was clearly pro-Castro, but equally there are times when he's viewed as being anti-Castro.
So I'm not a communist, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
He flew to Europe and in 1959 defected into Russia. He then met and married his wife Marina, and they had a baby daughter. The toppling of Fidel Castro in Cuba was intended to be a carbon copy of the CIA's activity in Guatemala in 1954. In the months that followed JFK becoming president, and based on his pre-election campaign, the CIA were absolutely convinced that he had no choice other than to support their plans in Cuba.
So Kennedy takes office and becomes aware that there has been a plan in place under the Eisenhower administration to invade Cuba. There has been tension with Cuba since Castro took office a few years earlier. Communist power 90 miles off the Florida coast does not look good for America's Cold War position.
We have to remember that the intention of the Republican campaign here was to effectively wrong-foot Kennedy, to seize public support by their plan to return Cuba to the exiles, to suppress the development of communism on their doorstep. Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, briefed John F. Kennedy with regard to the CIA's plans to depose Fidel Castro. And what he did was to come out with a plan where he publicly announced his support for the exiles and the idea of suppressing communism in Cuba.
Suddenly, out of nowhere, Kennedy inserts Castro, inserts Cuba as an election issue into the American psyche, into American minds. He basically starts saying to the American people in televised debates, President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon are doing nothing about Castro's Cuba. They're weak on national security. They're weak on foreign policy. Nixon is not as tough as he's telling you. And Nixon was absolutely horrified and put in an impossible position.
But as JFK would soon find out, talking tough on the campaign trail was very different to sitting in the Oval Office, actually calling the shots.
CIA director had come to the president with a desperate last-minute appeal. He knew that the president had said there would be no intervention.
At this moment in Washington, the president is under heavy pressure. He is being pressed to okay the invasion plan. A major source of this pressure is CIA reports on what is happening inside Cuba.
The question is, does he cancel it or does he go ahead with it? He's not seen as being experienced in American foreign policy or military matters, and he's concerned that if he decides not to go through with it, the military chiefs that he's going to have to work with are going to lose respect.
The president's experts have told him to go ahead. His staff has not argued against them. The decision is now his alone. Operation Pluto, the invasion of Cuba, is approved.
Kennedy had a major dilemma. The CIA's invasion plan had been conceived under his predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. It wasn't his plan, yet he had to give it his blessing. At the same time, however, he had pledged not to officially commit US troops to it. It had to be Cuban exiles actually on the ground, and then only supported by the CIA. It was doomed to fail before it even began.
At this moment in Guatemala, a Cuban exile army is being created by the CIA. A Cuban exile air force with B-26 bombers.
We were called up to the General Doster's office and asked if we wanted to participate. And I think there was a group of about 12 or 15 of us then. We were not the first people down there.
The intention then was to use Guatemala as a base to train a group of exiles to become the invading force in Cuba. The CIA trained the exiles in Guatemala as their support for the invasion was illegal under international law, and the offshore location of the training allowed them to claim plausible deniability. But JFK was increasingly doubtful, and it took a persuasive argument by Allen Dulles to convince him that just because it worked in Guatemala, it was bound to work in Cuba.
The CIA is riding high. The CIA has had good success, good covert action success in Italy in '48 and throughout the 1950s in keeping the communists out of power. The CIA has had good success in Iran in '53. It's had good success in Guatemala in '54. It's doing well in the cultural Cold War, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty, all this kind of stuff. It's confident, it's riding high, it's riding tall in the saddle. Arguably, it's overconfident.
On April the 15th, 1961, 8 B-26s flew to bomb airfields in Havana. 2 days later, the exiles dropped into Cuba, and it all started to go wrong.
So many things go wrong. Just one thing, it's a catalogue of disasters. The Cuban forces overrun the exiles who go in really quickly, and it's a big public embarrassment.
The CIA had assumed that once the invasion began, Kennedy would have to use further forces to back it up if it all began to fail. He did not. Kennedy cancelled further airstrikes, and the Bay of Pigs land invasion presented easy pickings for a largely intact Cuban air force.
It was a failure of United States policy, which led to a failure of United States power. Clearly, the United States had the naked power to destroy Castro, but it could not ignore world opinion and use this power. This was probably the low point, the worst moment for John F. Kennedy in the White House.
And then the blame game starts. Who was responsible for the fiasco at the Bay of Pigs? Was it JFK or was it the CIA? So we get this huge blame game taking place. Friends of the CIA in the American press start pushing the narrative that Kennedy had lost his nerve. Kennedy refused to give the invading force American air cover.
There's an old saying that victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. And I wouldn't be surprised if information is poured into you in regard to all the recent activities.
Kennedy's acolytes, Kennedy's friends, Kennedy's allies in the media start fighting back and pointing the finger of blame at the CIA. Dulles he's not fired as such, but he is diplomatically, politely asked to resign. So Dulles loses what for him was the job of a lifetime. However, angry that Allen Dulles almost certainly was over the Bay of Pigs and losing his job, Dulles himself refrained from publicly attacking President Kennedy.
In a single stroke, by his actions over the Bay of Pigs, JFK had alienated the CIA, the mob, his own military, and his entire national security infrastructure. He had committed the unforgivable sin of projecting American weakness abroad rather than American strength. His enemies would be emboldened and would be looking for an opportunity to strike back. We know that the CIA were becoming increasingly interested in Oswald's movements.
Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, spends a bit of time in Moscow. He actually tries to speak with the Soviets who are unconvinced and sort of turn him away. Lee Harvey Oswald returns to the United States, where the FBI is then in charge of sort of monitoring him, which they do.
In fact, one of the declassified documents is a release that transcribes a message given by J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI just 2 days after the assassination. What it states is that the FBI were intercepting Oswald's mail prior to the 22nd of November. Further, the FBI knew that Oswald had contacted both the Cuban and the Russian embassies in the weeks leading up to the event.
He would go into town on his own and come back with his Russian newspapers that he would then sit around with a Russian dictionary and try to translate out of this newspaper, and apparently taught himself to be semi-proficient anyway.
The issue, and this is one that would continue all the way into the 21st century, is that the CIA and the FBI don't collaborate that much. You have these international threats who also become a domestic one. The FBI are monitoring him, but the FBI are monitoring a lot of people at the time. They're probably spending more time surveying and trying to find dirt on civil rights leaders. Hindsight, of course, is a wonderful thing. And we can find individuals, documents that can back up arguments, ideas. But at the time, Lee Harvey Oswald was somebody who was known to the security services, but he was one of many needles in a very big haystack.
Having just emerged from the Bay of Pigs fiasco in 1961, JFK then went headlong into the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962.
All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
The Cold War was still developing apace, and Kennedy had taken the strategic decision to install ballistic missile capability in both Italy and Turkey. In response, the Soviets had done a range of negotiations with the Cubans to install their own launch pad facilities so they could locate their own ballistic missiles right on the doorstep of US soil.
The Americans had some sense that this was happening earlier, but it's finally confirmed with U-2 spy plane footage, which shows that they're almost operational.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
Well, I was sitting at work on a Saturday morning. We were preparing one of our ICBMs, our Titan I missiles, and I got a call from the command post, the bomb wing command post at Mountain Home Air Force Base, saying, "Lieutenant, you need to put the missile back on alert right now. We can't tell you why, but SAC says do it." We weren't told yet what it was about. We didn't find out until President Kennedy made his speech.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
The United States Security Council then recommended to Kennedy that they should fire their own missiles and take out, or effectively, the developing launch pads in Cuba. But rather than that, Kennedy took a very, very different approach. He decided to sit down and negotiate.
We got, Friday night, got a message from Khrushchev, which said that he would withdraw these missiles and technicians and so on, providing we did not plan to invade Cuba.
Where Kennedy cut the deal being Khrushchev, Soviets, get your missiles out of Cuba. And in return, 6 months down the line, we remove our missiles from Turkey.
The Americans and Kennedy agreed publicly, or state publicly, that they will not attempt to invade Cuba.
Whilst one could argue that this was a masterclass in negotiation skills, averting world catastrophe with full nuclear war, it did little to support either Khrushchev or Kennedy in their own countries. In Russia, Khrushchev was seen to have backed down against the might of the United States, and Kennedy in turn was seen to soften on the position of communism on the doorstep. Whilst the Cuban Missile Crisis did much to restore Kennedy's reputation as a statesman, capable of holding his own on the world stage, it further alienated the US military and the likes of General Curtis LeMay, who had wanted to use the crisis to take out the Soviets' nuclear arsenal. It also alienated the hawks at the CIA, who were incensed by the president's use of his brother Bobby's back channel to the Soviets via military intelligence officer Georgy Bolshakov to negotiate his deal directly with Khrushchev, rather than using their intelligence capability. As far as they were concerned, Kennedy's days were numbered. Having returned to the United States, Lee Harvey Oswald led an unusual lifestyle. There are reports that he had attempted to shoot and kill former Army General Edwin A. Walker in Dallas in April 1963, before then returning to his birthplace, New Orleans, and establishing an independent chapter of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee, of which he was the sole member. While passing out pro-Castro literature alongside unknown compatriots, Oswald was arrested after scuffling with anti-Castro Cuban exiles. Oswald was apparently leading an increasingly dissolute existence, heavy drinking, arguing with Marina, and then in September 1963, he headed down to the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico. On the face of it, he was offering his services to see if he could either go back to Moscow or to Havana. The CIA's chief of psychological warfare in Miami was bankrolling a Cuban exile group called the Student Revolutionary Directorate. And we know that that directorate was in contact with Oswald at the time he visited Mexico, which hints at a potential connection between Oswald and the CIA.
Remarkable treatment that Oswald received in Russia. He was allowed, for example, to join a rifle club within Russia. He returned to this country with favors that, as far as we know, were granted to no other person. The remarkable statement of the Chief Justice that some of the evidence given would never be brought out in our lifetime. This, of course, makes one wonder whether very serious matters of state are involved.
Since my son had defected to Russia, he should have been under surveillance.
Several thousand enthusiastic Texans are on hand to give the President and Mrs. Kennedy a warm welcome.
The Kennedys arrive at Love Field in Dallas. It's part of a tour of Texas that Kennedy is undertaking.
Kennedy was convinced that he'd win the 1964 election, but there was a problem with his running mate, Lyndon Johnson's home state of Texas. So he planned a 2-day, 5-city tour of the state to shore up support.
There were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed was the lack of Dallas police officers.
It seems crystal clear that sufficient precautions were simply not taken in Dallas. The Secret Service certainly appeared to have let the president down.
They asked, the agents were instructed
to back off as much as possible. We tried to stay as far away as we could to make them feel like that they were just among their friends and people along the side of the street, and wanted the people inside the street to feel like there was no barrier between them and the President and Mrs. Kennedy.
I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the President as he made his way towards the Trade Mart.
And there was an overpass we were going to have to go under, and I was looking at that, and I noticed there was some police on top, and that was good enough for me. And the windows were open on buildings, and people were on fire escapes, on top of buildings, any place they could be to get a better view of the motorcade.
Governor and Mrs. Connally ride in the presidential limousine.
And the same was true of the building we passed on the corner of Houston and Elm Street. It was called the Texas School Book Depository.
The President's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the Trade Mart. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
The preparation of the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service and the Dallas police force must surely be called into question. They should have been on high alert. And yet, simply because of the fine weather, they declined to insist that the President use the bubble top on his vehicle, which would have afforded some form of protection. They also failed to insist on using a couple of Secret Service agents on the back of the car. Could this have simply been CIA incompetence? Or does it hint at something more sinister, some sort of coordinated activity between some complex mix of the intelligence agencies and the mob?
So many stakeholders when it comes to the Kennedy assassination, isn't there? There's the Dallas police, there's the White House, there's the CIA, there's the FBI, there's the Cubans, there's anti-Castro Cubans, there's Castro Cuba. I mean, it's just, there's the Russians, there's the mafia. It's absolutely endless.
And all of this needs to be considered in the tangled web of crises involving the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the CIA involvement in sequential covert assassination plots through the Executive Action Committee.
For years, this has played into the conspiracy theory that somebody in the inside knew what had been planned, what was going on. 70 minutes after the shots are fired, the Dallas police arrest Lee Harvey Oswald.
Officer McDonald started to grapple with the man as he reached for a gun which was concealed under his shirt.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
Come on, man. President?
No, I'm just a patsy.
The fact that we could not interrogate him and find out his motive and exactly why he did this has created all the room for conspiracies of all kinds, and there's a new one every day.
The man with a gun, it's absolute panic. Oswald has been shot.
We had turned down on Elm Street, maybe 150 feet, and as I was scanning to my left, I heard this explosive noise from the rear over my right shoulder.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
In the aftermath of the assassination of JFK, there are some key questions that need to be asked.
And you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin. This is from the United Press from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas.
There's shock, there's horror. They need to show that the country is in safe hands.
The Dallas police immediately turned their attention to the book depository. Oswald was left free to wander out of the front door of the book depository, where apparently he was stopped by a Secret Service agent.
At the entrance of the building, he was stopped by a police officer. Told the police officer, well, he's all right, he works, so you needn't hold him.
70 minutes after the shots are fired, the Dallas police arrest Lee Harvey Oswald.
And some extra news which has come in since we started. A 24-year-old man, Lee H. Oswald, was arrested by Dallas police in connection with the murder of the policeman.
Officer McDonald started to grapple with the man as he reached for a gun which was concealed under his shirt.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
Come on, man. President.
No, I'm just a patsy.
The fact that we could not interrogate him and find out his motive and exactly why he did this has created all the room for conspiracies of all kinds, and there's a new one every day.
The man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Oswald has been shot. He's been shot.
The man who shot Lee Oswald has been identified as Jack Ruby, R-U-B-Y. He runs a place in Dallas called the Carousel Club.
Questions have to be asked. Who was Jack Ruby and why did he shoot Lee Harvey Oswald? We need to go back and truly discover who Jack Ruby was and why he was involved.
You have to start with JFK's father, Joseph P. Kennedy. He's the one who built up the family's wealth. He speculated in the unregulated stock market before the 1929 Wall Street crash, cashed out of that before that happened, and invested in things like real estate and in the film industry and in many other places. Robert Kennedy, his brother, who had been his campaign manager, so he was sort of visible there.
With John F. Kennedy's presidency, there emerged something of a split in the family. His father, Joseph, was outwardly a respected businessman and former ambassador. However, it's long been thought that he was heavily involved with the mob and had been since the 1920s. His relationship with Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters came under particular strain when, after what some would call a bought election result in Illinois that put JFK in the White House, John, and in particular Bobby, continued to pursue Hoffa and his associates. The Kennedy brothers not only failed to restore the mob interests in Cuba, they also continued to play rough with them on the home front. And to Hoffa's view, this was a betrayal, a double cross. Was this a reason for revenge?
Well, I think the only important thing really is whether we get legislation to deal with the problems. I think we've uncovered the fact that there are many difficulties, that there has been misuse of union funds, misappropriation of union funds, that there have been gangsters and hoodlums that have taken over unions.
The dominant element of the mafia in the Midwest was the Chicago outfit, who rose to power in the 1920s through the Prohibition years under Al Capone and Johnny Torino.
In Chicago, unlike New York, over the years, the Chicago was in the outfit, in organized crime. They were getting away from the violence in Chicago. Unlike New York, Chicago was more underground.
Their influence spread from both California and Nevada through to Florida. Three of the most influential heads were Sam Giancana of the Chicago mob, Santo Traficante in Florida and Cuba, and Carlos Marcello, based in New Orleans.
The Kennedy family grew up around that. They knew these people. This wasn't just sort of a political connection for the sake of an election. His links with the film industry brought him into connection with celebrities, which then sort of feeds into JFK's later career. I'm sure in campaign headquarters behind the scenes they're saying, well, get Frank Sinatra, play that up, he's really well known.
Frank Sinatra introduced Judith Exner to John F. Kennedy in 1960.
It's Mr. John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
And it was the beginning of a long-running affair between the two of them.
Well, I think a tremendous amount is being revealed right now that many journalists turn their heads against, or about face, I should say. They had no intention of writing anything about Jack Kennedy and his private life.
At the same time, Exner was having an affair with Sam Giancana and was acquainted with Johnny Rosselli, who worked for Giancana. And it was Johnny Rosselli that was absolutely instrumental in wiping clean any record of JFK's earlier marriage in 1947. Yuri Malcolm was a Palm Beach socialite who had dated JFK's older brother, Joe Kennedy Jr. After Joe Jr.'s death in World War II, JFK took up with her, and astonishingly, documents from the time seem to show that they eloped and were married in 1947. This didn't suit the Kennedy family plan, and the marriage was quietly annulled while a more suitable candidate was groomed for Joseph's eldest surviving son. This was not great politics because it gave the mafia a hold over the future president. Supposedly, Joseph Kennedy had actually struck a deal with Giancana on the basis that if he could secure the Union vote for the presidency, then he'd get the then president to lay off the mafia in the future.
No one wants to admit the truth. They somehow think I'm destroying Jack Kennedy.
He used to make sarcastic remarks to me that your boyfriend wouldn't be president if it wasn't for me.
We're also aware that J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, actually sat down with Kennedy and told him that both he and Robert Kennedy were aware of the affair and suggested that he back off. Immediately after his inauguration as President of the United States, John F. Kennedy appointed his brother Robert Kennedy as the Attorney General. He then made it a priority to clamp down on organized crime.
Robert Kennedy is trying to convince Hoover that the FBI needs to refocus, right? That actually organized crime is one of the biggest threats to the nation.
Went after Sam Giancana, implicating Judith Exner within the process. Giancana then felt betrayed. He was incensed, having done a deal with Joseph Kennedy to secure the votes using the unions, and then in return getting the presidency to back off, putting pressure on the mafia. To then find out that Robert Kennedy was focused on organized crime was a major problem for him. Whatever the reason, and believing that they were protected by their high office, John and Bobby were willing to renege on their father's promises to the mob and continued to crack down on organized crime. Jack Ruby is clearly a major character in the assassination story.
Jack is a very emotional person, like people know him. All the people that know him as an emotional person.
He was born Jacob Rubenstein in Chicago, dropped out of school, running errands for Al Capone, and became an agent for the Refuse Collectors Union, which was later to become part of the Teamsters, and eventually becoming owner of the members-only Sovereign Club, which later changed names to the Carousel Club, becoming what was effectively a public strip joint. He had ties to Giancana, Trafficante, and Marcello families.
What kind of a man was Jack Ruby, or is Jack Ruby?
Well, I believe he was a nice employer to me. I believe he's a highly nervous person. I don't really like to give my own opinion.
The clubs were frequented by the police, organising prostitutes, free drinks and the like. An ideal situation for developing close links with the police and the FBI as an informant. It has also been suggested, because of Ruby's links with the Chicago outfit, that the Carousel Club was also a major hub for organised crime.
One of the things that the CIA starts exploring is the possibility of using the mob to do something about Castro and Cuba. So it starts to have conversations with mobsters like Sam Giancana, Rosselli, and it says to them, what can you do down there in Cuba? We know you're angry.
The relationship between the United States and Cuba deteriorated rapidly. The CIA had made numerous assassination attempts on Castro, and since Cuba was the one place where their and the mob's interests coincided, there was no reason not to use mob hitmen to carry them out.
We've certainly been aware of the information that Mr. Rosselli was testifying before a Senate committee in Washington, that he had apparently assisted the CIA in setting up alleged assassination plots of Castro by his influence with organized crime.
And if you're the mob, and you're in the business of having dirt on people, dirt that you can weaponize and leverage for your own purposes, it's quite advantageous, isn't it? Doing something for President Kennedy that President Kennedy doesn't want the world to know about. That's quite useful political dirt to have on such a powerful individual.
Castro shut down organized crime on Cuba, seizing the assets of Traficante, and having imprisoned him for a period, eventually deported him and declaring him as an undesirable alien.
Before Castro came along, you had all these lucrative casinos and restaurants and other scurrilous mob type stuff going on down there, prostitution rings, you name it. We know you're angry because since Castro's come in, all those ill-gotten gains that have been coming up, padding your bank balances, have been taken away.
There is little doubt that Jack Ruby visited Havana in the summer of 1959. At that time, Santo Traficante was being held in prison. He'd been arrested, suspected of expanding his narcotics activity in Cuba. There's evidence to suggest that Jack Ruby visited Traficante in prison and actually brokered a deal with Castro to enable his release. We have to remember that Jack Ruby had strong ties into the Chicago outfit.
Kennedy at first is unaware that the CIA is having these conversations with people like Rosselli and Giancana, and eventually when Kennedy discovers that these conversations had taken place, he was absolutely horrified.
Just before the assassination, we know that Jack Ruby met with two mafia bosses. They were Carlos Marcello and Santos Traficante. We know that Ruby visited New Orleans that summer, as did Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin. There are reports that Oswald spent time at the Carousel Club and had conversations with Jack Ruby.
To my knowledge, if I recollect correctly, I saw him in the audience last week.
Lee Oswald in the audience at the club, at the Carousel Club, which is owned by Jack Rubenstein?
Given Ruby's connections with Giancana and the mob, and the fact that his clubs were commonly frequented by the local police with Ruby as an informant, it's clear that his clubs were becoming a melting pot for conspiracy theories. What is also clear is that Jack Ruby and Lee Oswald were moving in the same circles and mixing with the same people in the days and weeks leading up to Dallas 63. The Dallas police immediately turned their attention to the book depository.
I seen everybody was converging on the school book depository.
Although no one was ever positively identified as the shooter at the 6th floor window of the book depository, the police were apparently totally confident that the book depository was the position for the assassin. Somewhere in the confusion, they chased someone over the railway siding, with eyewitnesses reporting a number of official Secret Service types in the car park. This gave rise over time to reference to the Grassy Knoll shooter.
Sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot, and it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence.
We all four seen about the same thing as the shots. The smoke came from behind the hedge.
They claimed that they'd found a sniper's nest on the 6th floor of the book depository with 3 cartridges but no gun. They quickly concluded that he must have taken the shot and headed down the stairwell to make his escape. However, a number of eyewitnesses claimed to have used the same stairwell directly after the shooting and had seen no one making their escape.
The area being completely roped off by Dallas police, the K-9 units here at the scene. I don't know what for, but a fire truck is standing by. Most of the officers, literally hundreds of them, armed with sawed-off shotguns, pump shotguns, automatic shotguns, and submachine guns.
Found Lee Harvey Oswald in the break room with a soda. They immediately grabbed him, but the manager of the depository told them to let him go because he works here.
He looked probably a little startled, like anybody else would if you just put a gun in his stomach all at once.
I turned around and asked him if the man worked for him, and if he knew him. And he said, yes, he works for me, and I know him.
Oswald was left free to wander out of the front door of the book depository, where apparently he was stopped by a Secret Service agent, but only to ask where the nearest telephone was, and Oswald directed him back into the book depository where a phone sat in the ground floor.
At the entrance of the building, he was stopped by a police officer, and some manager in the building told the police officer, well, he's all right, he works, so you needn't hold him. So they let him go. That's how he got out.
But the question has to be asked. Surely it was standard practice to lock down the crime scene for forensic investigation. Why was that not the case? Oswald caught one of the most unlikely getaway vehicles, a public transport bus. travelled back to his lodgings, got changed, had a conversation with his landlady before setting off for the cinema.
And the door opened, he come in a hurry. I said, who you in a hurry? He never reparted his lips, went to his room, got a short coat put on, and went out and to the bus stop. And that's the last I saw of it.
And all within half an hour of the assassination, just before 1 o'clock. It is believed that Ruby was not in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination, and according to those closest to him, he was utterly distraught by it.
Never thought I'd see Jack cry. And tears did come from Jack's eyes. And he said, it's something that's unbelievable. How could a man shoot the president of our country?
Even paying a visit to his local rabbi to seek spiritual guidance. He apparently disappears from view until after Oswald's arrest and his impromptu press conference at the Dallas police station, at which Ruby is seen loitering.
How could this happen? You know, to me, it kind of adds to this whole conspiracy.
For years, this has played into the conspiracy theory that somebody in the inside knew what had been planned, what was going on, and they were looking to get rid of all trace.
And Dallas police say that they have found the remains of fried chicken and paper on the 5th floor. They say the sniper apparently had been there for some time. The Secret Service said the assassin apparently used a high-powered Army or Japanese rifle.
It is only later that they found the gun, hidden behind boxes near a stairway away from the 6th floor window.
The police found a .303 British rifle, 3 empty cartridge cases, and a wedge of paper that had apparently been used as a gun rest.
But the Dallas police reported a moment ago that a foreign-made rifle believed to have been used in the shooting of the president had no fingerprints on it.
The deputy sheriff that found the gun identified it initially, but with a high degree of certainty, as a 7.65mm Mauser. But this was later changed to a 6.4mm Mannlicher Carcano. Exactly the same as evidence later provided by police would suggest Oswald had purchased by mail order, although he apparently used the name Alec Hedel as an alias. JFK was shot on Elm Street at 12:29. He was then rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, arriving at around 12:34, where physicians worked to save his life.
I remember running home, getting home, and there's my mom, and she's watching a live newscast with Walter Cronkite.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
The President of the United States is dead. I have just talked to Father Oscar Hubert of the Holy Trinity Catholic Church. He and another priest tell me that the pair of men have just administered the last rites of the Catholic Church to President Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president.
You expect that these leaders are protected and things are planned.
I was quite shocked because actually I'm not from England, I'm from Australia. And generally he was very well liked there and he had great support everywhere. I was very shocked. I still can't believe it that he's not there anymore.
I think the person who ever shot him must have been a nutcase. There's no other word for him. I think it's terrible what happened.
The Mafia were seemingly overjoyed at the news, with a number of informants coming forward and tapped telephone conversations with members of the Mafia over the coming days and weeks. One Mafia informant recalls celebrating with Florida Mafia boss Santos Trafficante, remembering him saying, "Our problems are over. I hope Jimmy is happy now." Hoffa was apparently delighted. "Have you heard the good news? They got the son of a bitch." Apparently, Louisiana Mafia boss Carlos Marcello said, "Jimmy owes me. He owes me big."
Does this for you prove that the mob did the assassination? The Southern mobsters killed the president using Lee Harvey Oswald.
The Southern mob wanted him killed,
New Orleans and Tampa,
right.
specifically.
No, both Santo Traficante in Tampa in Florida and Carlos Marcello in Louisiana.
Right.
Carlos Marcello in Louisiana. One of his bookmaking rings was run by Dutz Millay. Dutz Millay was Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle. And Lee Harvey Oswald spent the summer of '63 in New Orleans, and he was close to Dutz Millay. So, I mean, what conclusion you can draw from that, we haven't got the smoking gun.
Just a few minutes before this report, we heard from one of our newsmen in Dallas on the scene, James Kerr, who said that a Dallas policeman, J.D. Tippit, was shot to death by an unknown man in a car. The officer was shot about 2 miles from the scene of the presidential assassination.
Tippit was a veteran officer of the Dallas police and had received a radio call to take him way off his beat, and he reported to be in position at 12:54. Already by that time, there had been a number of broadcasts describing a suspect in the assassination in Dealey Plaza. Tippit was seen apparently stopping someone who resembled the description, and he'd wound down his window. The individual leant through and had a conversation with Officer Tippit.
3 witnesses tell police how Officer Tippit pulled over to the curb, then got from his patrol car to talk to his assailant.
At some point, Tippit then stepped out of the car, and as he was walking around the front of the car, the individual drew a gun and killed Tippit, shooting him 3 times in the stomach and once to the right temple.
Hello, police operator. Go ahead. Go ahead, it says news. Hello, we've had a shooting out here. Where is it at?
The killing, which had all the hallmarks of a mob shooting, was reported in by a bystander at just before 1:15.
And just as he got even with the front wheel on the driver's side, this man shot him 3 times in the wink of your eye.
A wallet was apparently found discarded next to the body in the name of Alec Hiddell, which happened to be the name that Oswald had reportedly used when ordering his rifle by mail order, but there was no firm and absolute link to Oswald in the shooting. It is also generally believed to be highly unlikely that Oswald would have had time to have shot the president, to have caught the bus back to his lodgings, to have got changed and had a conversation with his landlady, before then making his way to the cinema, being intercepted by and then killing Tippit, all within a 45-minute period. A number of key questions need to be asked now, not least of which is who killed Officer Tippit. If Tippit was stopping a suspect of that assassination, why on earth was he so casual to wind down the window and allow them to lean through and have a conversation? And was it a complete coincidence that the entire incident took place very close to the location where Jack Ruby actually lived, an individual that know an awful lot about mob shootings? It has been alleged by some that Tippit may have been dispatched to take care of Oswald, but he failed, leaving Ruby to clear up the mess.
I have heard Jack talk about the Kennedys, and I've been trying to think, and it's so confusing today, but I believe he disliked Bobby Kennedy.
Within all this, we have to add that there were witness reports of various combinations of Ruby, Oswald and Tippit together at the Carousel Club.
70 minutes after the shots are fired, the Dallas police arrest Lee Harvey Oswald. He is then charged with the murder of a Dallas police officer, Officer Tippit.
One suspect has been apprehended, according to Dallas police, a young man who denies anything to do with the shooting.
If we can, we will try to clear up this arrest which is taking place in Dallas.
In a near-empty theatre, he chose a seat directly next to another individual. At the interval, he went out and purchased some popcorn, so he clearly had some money, and then went back into the film and sat directly next to someone else. Most unusual behaviour, unless he was potentially meeting someone there.
The suspect had entered the Texas Theater some 5 blocks away.
And some extra news which has come in since we started. A 24-year-old man, Lee H. Oswald, was arrested by Dallas police in connection with the murder of the policeman. He was taken screaming from a cinema. Police are questioning him to find out whether he's any connection with the murder of the president.
When he was arrested, he apparently got into a scuffle with the police and drew a gun.
Officer McDonald started to grapple with the man as he reached for a gun which was concealed under his shirt, and The gun was fired one time by the suspect, but luckily it misfired.
However, the recently declassified note from J. Edgar Hoover states that Oswald was handcuffed without being armed. Someone is clearly wrong.
Come on, man. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy. President.
When we got the permission to remove the body and took the casket out to the ambulance that we had there, Edward Berkeley got in the back of the ambulance with the casket. I suggested to Mrs. Kennedy that we ride in the car, and she said, no, I'm going to ride in the back with the president.
Kennedy's body is then taken from the hospital, placed back on Air Force One.
And the president's body, with some police motorcycle escort, is now pulling away from the hospital.
There we were, three of us with the casket in the back of the hearse, all the way to Love Field.
It is about 1.5 hours since he was shot.
The nature of the American Constitution means that you have to transfer the presidency to the new president. It has to be done formally to be legal. Before the plane takes off, about an hour and a half or so after Kennedy is shot, Lyndon Johnson takes the oath of office on Air Force One.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
President Johnson wanted the press on that airplane. He wanted the press to be aboard to witness the swearing in, which is probably a very wise decision to have witnesses to this thing. I heard the president ask Marie Famer, his secretary, to go and ask Mrs. Kennedy if she would like to stand with him for the swearing in, and she sent word that she did, but she needed a few minutes to compose herself. And after a few minutes, Mrs. Kennedy appeared into the conference room. And then at that point, I saw the gravity of the situation. I saw what she had witnessed on her clothing.
There is little doubt that the CIA were aware of plots against Kennedy's life. Jackie Kennedy herself was invited to get changed out of her pink Chanel suit. She absolutely refused, saying she wanted them to see what they had done to her husband.
Pieces of the president's skull, flesh, blood on her clothing splattered. The right stocking was heavily congealed with blood where she had cradled his head in her lap. At some point on the flight, when asked by an aide of hers, Mrs. Kennedy, would you like to clean up while we're en route back to Washington? And Mrs. Kennedy said, no, I want them to see what they have done. And those words have reverberated throughout the history of the assassination.
Does her language perhaps suggest that she also knew who might be behind the assassination plot? 25 years after the assassination, a deathbed confession provided further crucial evidence.
The deathbed confession by Traficante. Right. I think Carlos, meaning Marcelo, screwed up. We should have killed Bobby and not Jack. I think that is an important piece in the puzzle. The other is that he was with Santo Traficante the night President Kennedy was murdered.
And he was celebrating.
And he can describe the euphoria of Santo Traficante. And I knew from writing a book about Robert Kennedy how much Bobby wanted to get rid of prosecutorially both Marcelo and Traficante, and already had Hoffa.
The CIA's chief priority after the assassination was limiting the parameters, limiting the scope of inquiry that would inevitably follow the Kennedy assassination. The CIA did not want something like the Warren Commission coming along and investigating everything to do with US national security.
Having been arrested for the killing of Officer Tippit, with no real evidence that would hold up in any court, Oswald still hadn't been charged for the assassination of the president.
In Dallas Police Headquarters, Lee Oswald is booked for the slaying of Officer Tippit. Tight-lipped, bruised from his battle with his captors, he is led through a gauntlet of newsmen, and the world gets its first look at Lee Harvey Oswald.
And yet the media was in an absolute frenzy. J. Edgar Hoover, in one of the more recently declassified notes, is quoted as saying that he wished that the police would stop doing so much damn talking on television. Oswald was taken here, there, and everywhere in the public eye and constantly being asked whether or not he'd killed the president.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
Was this simply incompetence on behalf of law enforcement and the Secret Service, or was he being paraded intentionally? We have to remind ourselves that there was no positive evidence that linked Oswald with the assassination. There were no eyewitnesses that could identify Oswald. There were no usable fingerprints on the rifle that was located at the book depository. And even Hoover himself acknowledged that there was no evidence against him that would stand up in court. But what we do know is that from the moment Oswald was arrested, Jack Ruby was dogging his every move, attending his every appearance, waiting for his moment to strike.
Lee Oswald is being moved from police headquarters to the county jail.
There is Lee Oswald.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Hoover states clearly that the FBI had told Dallas police on 2 separate occasions in the short period after the assassination that there was a plan to kill Oswald, and he considered it inexcusable that they had left him so open to an approach from the front.
There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. The detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot.
Oswald is also assassinated publicly in front of the cameras by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Again, it's shocking, 2 public murders in such a short space of time.
How on earth was this allowed to happen? Ruby presented himself as an independent lone assassin, in shock, traumatized by JFK's killing.
The idea that maybe Oswald has been silenced because he'd said, I'm just a patsy, has also then played into conspiracy theories that have come since. Jack Ruby has never really offered up a convincing explanation for why he did what he did.
Have you got any relationship between the two yet?
Between Rubenstein?
Yeah.
No, at the present time we have not. There was a story down there that...
Was he ever in his bar and stuff like that?
There was a story that this fellow had been in this nightclub, this strip-tease joint that he has, but that has not been able to be confirmed. Now, this fellow Rubenstein is a very shady character, has a bad record, street brawler, fighter, and that sort of thing. He is what I would put in the category of one of the egomaniacs. He likes to be in the limelight. He knew all the police.
If the mob were implicated in the assassination of JFK, it was important to have Lee Harvey Oswald silenced. It suited them that the whole nation believed that he was the lone gunman. If it was revealed that the mob had had a hand in the assassination, the consequences for all would have been huge. This aligns perfectly with what the authorities wanted, with Hoover saying just 2 days after the assassination that the public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin.
Questions are being asked of the Secret Service. Did they do something wrong? Was there error? If there was, can that be put right? But there's also a public sort of message that's being sent here, which is we're going to look at it and make sure it can't happen again. It doesn't happen again. We're going to get to the truth.
My friends, their families, they're on, in front of the television. You didn't do anything. We didn't do anything. We just sat there and watched this. And I mean, I'd never done anything like that before. Sad. I remember my mom, you know, tearing up, which that was rare.
You are watching an official reenactment of the murder of President John F. Kennedy. Filmed from the window where the alleged assassin crouched. November 22nd, and the Warren Report.
So the Warren Commission was set up by President Johnson to investigate the events around Kennedy's assassination.
It was empowered to mandate the attendance and testimony of witnesses and the production of evidence.
This bizarre sequence of double killings raised great questions. Who actually fired the shots that killed Kennedy? Why did Ruby shoot Oswald? Was there a conspiracy? Were right-wingers involved? Was it a Russian plot, a Cuban plot? The new president, Lyndon Johnson, ordered these questions answered.
As Walter Cronkite rightly speculated at the time, conspiracy theories were running wild as the Warren Commission set to work. Subsequent investigations have shown, though, the board assembled from those loyal to Johnson was only ever really pointed to one conclusion: the lone gunman.
This committee labored 10 months, took testimony from hundreds of witnesses, then brought forth a document close to 1,000 pages.
Its final report was presented to President Johnson on September the 24th, 1964, and made public 3 days later.
They found that it was in all likelihood that Kennedy had been assassinated by a lone gunman, and that lone gunman was most likely Lee Harvey Oswald.
It also concluded that Jack Ruby operated alone when he killed Oswald 2 days later.
I can't honestly say that I've ever been completely relieved of the fact that there might have been international connections.
To say the least, the findings of the Commission have proved controversial, with concerns that the Commission had acted to cover up the incompetence of the authorities. In my personal judgment, there is more than evidence, there is proof that the Warren Commission distorted the truth in their report, interfering with the autopsy reports, selectively altering the facts to align with their lone shooter theory, with their magic bullet theory, fabricating forensic stories that simply defy the laws of physics, and carefully selecting testimony that aligns with their desired outcome.
Well, that would seem to indicate that you don't have full confidence in the Warren Commission report.
No, I think the Warren Commission study, and I think first of all, is composed of the ablest, most judicious, bipartisan men in this country. Second, I think they had only one objective, and that was the truth.
Johnson's focus never seemed to be on getting to the truth, and the Commission reflected that. They ran with the official story, and the matter was put to bed, or at least that's what the Warren Commission, and presumably the Johnson White House, were keen to believe. Jack Ruby's trial presents a situation as extraordinary as his actions. His mother testified that he was distraught after JFK's assassination, having what seemed to be some sort of breakdown, leading him to avenge the president's death. His lawyer claimed the nightclub owner was mentally unwell, and the trial dragged on as witnesses, including Ruby's rabbi, were called on in his defense. Ultimately, the jury were having none of it, and he was sentenced to death. However, an appeal was lodged, overturning his verbal confession, and a retrial was ordered in February 1967. Ruby never had his day in court, though. Already riddled with cancer, he was killed by a blood clot, passing away just before Christmas at Parkland Hospital, where Kennedy and Oswald had preceded him. Bobby, of course, was wholly expected to step into his brother's shoes, snubbed by Lyndon Johnson and racked with guilt that his tenure as Attorney General may have prompted the assassination. He stood for the presidency himself, convinced that the mob killed JFK and that he would pursue them from the White House. His campaign, though, came to a grim end in a hotel kitchen on the campaign trail when he was shot dead by Sirhan on June the 5th, 1968.
This is a time of tragedy and loss. Senator Robert Kennedy is dead.
The United States House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations was established in 1976.
The House Select Committee looks into these very high-profile assassinations that happen in the 1960s.
And charged with the investigations of both the JFK assassination and the 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King.
In part because it's just so unusual to have so many very high-profile figures assassinated in such a public way. So you've got that. The conspiracy theories are rife. There are lots of people who've never believed the report of the Warren Commission, who think that it was a cover-up, despite all the attempts that they'd made to try to make sure that it was seen as a neutral commission.
The final report was issued in 1979, in which they concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy.
That then feeds more conspiracy theories, further and further.
But at the same time, they ruled out any involvement from the Soviet Union, Cuba, organized crime, or CIA, FBI, or the Secret Service. However, they did not rule out the possibility that individual mob members or Cuban exiles could have been involved.
It appears that with a probability of 95% or better, there was indeed a shot fired from the grassy knoll.
In my opinion, there are two significant schools of thought. One is that Oswald operated independently as the lone shooter, but he was surrounded by an environment in which the authorities were incompetent on a serial basis.
There was a lot of criticism of particularly the Secret Service after Kennedy's assassination. I mean, the job is to protect the president and the people who were in that car, right? And Kennedy died and Governor Connolly of Texas was injured.
The other is that some combination of the CIA, the FBI, the police force, the Secret Service, and the mafia were totally complicit in the assassination.
So on one hand, yeah, they failed at a basic level, but I think it's played into the conspiracy theories.
Probably never know. I'd put to you that even if a smoking gun came out tomorrow that said that it was James Jesus Angleton or Alan Dulles or Edward Lansdale on the grassy knoll, and I'm not suggesting it was, even if a smoking gun document came out that proved that tomorrow, would anyone believe it?
Precisely how many mistakes can be made before we start to question the defense of what we could call plausible incompetence?
Why was the bubble top not on the car? Was the route not checked? Why were the windows in the schoolbook depository open?
Taking Oswald off the stop or flash listing by both the FBI and CIA just 6 weeks before the assassination. And all of this needs to be considered in the tangled web of crises involving the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the involvement of the Chicago outfit, and the CIA involvement in sequential covert assassination plots through the Executive Action Committee. And the details of the assassination are simply straight out of the CIA's Executive Action Committee playbook. So you need to decide, and there's inevitably an amount of judgment required here. But the key question is, at what point does serial incompetence become a coordinated conspiracy? Who knows, perhaps the declassification of the remaining batch of files will finally put the JFK mystery to rest.